Welcome to the Irish NFL Show and welcome to our Week 10 Talking Points brought to you by Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. You can check out Buskers on the Ball on Sunday evenings where they show a selection of live games and Red Zone every NFL weekend. Well, last weekend had a host of nail-biters with some serious playoff implications. The Ravens were brought down to earth by the Browns. The Niners bounced back and ended the Jags' 5-game winning streak in the process. Josh Dobbs produced yet more magic for the Vikings, and CJ Stroud and the Texans somehow managed to top even their own Week 9 heroics by outdueling Joe Burrow and the Bengals. We start, though, this Tuesday, Brian, with some semi-breaking news, or at least in the last couple of hours. Ken Dorsey, offensive coordinator with the Buffalo Bills, no longer. He's been fired following that Monday Night Football loss to the Broncos. I will put you on the spot. Is this justified, or is this your classic bit of scapegoating by GM to protect the head coach?
I would go with the latter there, which is that they're looking for an escape route already to kind of find the narrative as to why things aren't going well for them. For me, okay, the offense wasn't at the level we've seen earlier in the season, last night, certainly not last week in Cincinnati, but more so on the defense for me in terms of, and not necessarily last night. The game last night was a lot of turnovers, but it hasn't been the offense for large parts of the season, which has let them down. It's the defense, and you can put a lot of it down to injuries and the lack of quarterback pressure and the rushes and the sacks. It hasn't been at the level in which we probably saw at the early part of last season for the Bills, and I think it's a bit hasty for them to let him go. I never felt things were right there either, though. I never felt they were really kind of bought into him ever since Brian Dable moved on. When we saw the relationship which he had with a lot of the staff there, and obviously he brought a number of people with him. We saw the relationship he had with Josh Allen, and we saw the unsatisfactory ending when Dable and McDermott got together at the end of that recent game where they hardly said a word to each other. So obviously there's no love lost there, but by and large, he looked like he was a very popular man. I never got the sense that Dorsey stepping into his shoes was maybe the right answer, or that they just didn't buy into him. But I certainly think he's not the reason why they're 5-5. I think there's other factors here.
All that notwithstanding, Brian, I'd completely agree with you there. Mina Kimes sums it up from ESPN in a tweet here. Bills offense through week 10, right? They're third in DVOA, first in success rate, third in EPA per play, fourth in QB rating, third in yards per play, second and third down conversion, and third in red zone efficiency. The thing that's killing them is they are 32nd, literally the worst team in the league for turnovers, and Josh Allen leads the league in interceptions thrown. That's not on Ken Dorsey. He's not telling Josh Allen to throw the ball to the guy wearing the wrong jersey.
No, but you also have to bear in mind this is not just this season. You're thinking last season, there was games there last year. I mean, the Vikings game springs to mind, that mad one with the crazy ending. He threw a number of interceptions in that game, including the overtime one. There was careless interceptions in New York last year against the Jets. They lost that game. So it's a bit of a trend since they kind of moved on from a different offensive coordinator. Things haven't been as stable offensively, and his turnover rate has shot up. But like the run game has been non-existent for the last 2 or 3 years, even under the previous regime of coaching. And yet, like their best player this season, he's outstanding for me is James Cook, and they didn't bring him into the game until mid-second quarter, and he had a really kind of productive game thereafter. His numbers were quite good for someone who kind of looked like he played the whole game. It was a strange move, but yeah, it's the stats outweigh kind of the outweigh the decision, I would say.
Colin, we talked about this early on in the season. In fact, I think we talked about it from back as far as preseason, how you were comfortable in the Bills, and I think we all were, given they've been effectively, to be fair to them, a model of consistency in terms of putting wins on the board in the regular season over the past couple of years. But there were those signs, Brian talked about, since the departure of Dayball, how things haven't been quite right offensively. Leslie Frazier also kind of stepping away in slightly strange circumstances that just gave a little bit of a kind of a flag that, the culture, there might be something just slightly off behind the scenes there. And you're looking at the results on the field and going, I wonder, was there a little bit more to that?
I think so. And to me, I mean, I think this is crazy. If you want a comparison to what this is Billy Zane in the Titanic. Women and children to the boats, and he throws them out of the way, grabs a child and hops on board. That is what Sean McDermott is doing, because he knows the ship is hitting iceberg, and he is desperately looking to save his skin. The problem, like the turnovers are an issue, but like again, James Cook gets stripped of the ball, then they leave him out, then he comes in, then he has this kind of, was that on Allen or was that on him in the missed handoff? Then he has the Aussie rules bounce. Like, it was a really weird game last night, and week 1 was really weird as well. But apart from that, they haven't been terrible. And like,
but it's gas column that the headlines are Dorsey sacked following Monday Night Football flop. You're going flop, like, you 12 guys on the team on the field on special teams, and you literally blew the game because of that. Terrible penalty given away. They're defensive and special teams mistakes to kill them.
Last night was such a strange game, and it was weird being up in the middle of the night watching it. Like, because the defense is really good at times, but what gets lost in this, right, by Sean McDermott doing this, they had knocked the Broncos out of field goal range right at the end by basically going all out blitz. And then Sean McDermott did the exact same play again when there's no need to do it. And what does Russ do? Russ actually burns them that time around. It allows the Broncos to get in, and then you have 12 men on the field. So if they didn't have the 12 men, was Dorsey getting fired today? I don't believe so. So you're basically blaming Ken Dorsey for some really weird turnovers. Because the Gabe Davis one where that hits his hands and goes to Justin Simmons, I mean, that's not on Josh Allen. That's not on Ken Dorsey. Gabe Davis should have caught that ball. I think that this is absolutely ridiculous that Ken Dorsey has been sacked. And what's incredible is Ken Dorsey has been sacked, right? And you can look at the stats. I mean, his last 5 in comparison to Dable's last 5, they're not that different. And this wasn't the start. This was Dable's last 5 when things were kind of firing there. And I'm not saying he clearly doesn't have the same sort of relationship with Josh Allen, but Nathaniel Hackett is still in a job.
Yeah, and Matt Canada. Right. We've also had, Brian, interesting to see Trayvon Diggs, not Stephon Diggs, but Trayvon Diggs weighing in on it on Twitter, saying the brother Stephon should be out of there, and pointing out slightly unkindly that Josh Allen didn't start going off until Stephon Diggs arrived in the building.
Yeah, but like, what can we read into this? I mean, there's like Diggs, as in Stephon Diggs, was clearly disappointed at the end of the season last year over the manner of the Bengals loss. He was very clearly upset on the sideline. He was upset on Thanksgiving Day because he wasn't getting enough of the ball against the Lions. He was upset during the off-season training camp. They managed to kind of calm that show down by quickly announcing that the GM and head coach had signed new contracts to distract from the Diggs thing. Then it wasn't a problem going into the season. I'm still not convinced that it's fully resolved. And then you have his brother coming out with comments that, to me, it sounds like he's trying to do the work for Stephon Diggs, which essentially is to ask for a trade without asking for a trade. Come the end of the season, he'll try and navigate a way out of Buffalo and go somewhere else. But we've seen with other players such as Tyreek Hill, maybe not the same manner. It doesn't necessarily always mean you're going to have the best times elsewhere. Okay, Hill is fortunate he's gone to a team that's on the rise, so he's having a good season. But careful what you wish for, because the Bills are still a really strong contender. There'll be many a player and many a wide receiver who would like to be playing with Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen is on the wrong side of this, because Josh Allen tends to keep his mouth shut and doesn't say a lot.
Colin, another interesting situation potentially brewing in Carolina, where the Athletic reporting today, and that's per Diana Rossini on their Athletic football show, that Frank Reich might be under a little bit of pressure, saying there's frustration at ownership level, no less, with Bryce Young's development or lack thereof, the offense looking sluggish, and an overall quote-unquote lack of effort.
Like, this is unbelievable. Like, this is David Tepper. This is a billionaire throwing the toys out of the pram. He wants instant success. He's the one who made the decision to move on from Steve Wilkes. He's the one who decided on Frank Reich. He's the one who decided said to Reich that he wanted to bring in a staff. What was it that we had one of the Carolina beat reporters on called it the Avengers, and that seems to be kind of the talking point that they've been given. He wanted that. He wanted Bryce Young. and now it's not gone right. I mean, this is like, he is even more meddlesome than Jerry Jones, the man with 2 radio shows during the week. And while he is not in anywhere like Dan Schneider, who was a bad person as well as a bad owner, he is quickly becoming a terrible owner because he doesn't stop meddling. And like, when you're in like you got your new QB, you've got your new head coach, you're putting pressure on already, and then you're pictured up making faces when things aren't going right. Like, how is this surprising? Like, you're the one who traded away your wide receiver because you wanted this to happen, and he appears to think he can bend the NFL to his will, and he's about to find out he can't. And I think you can move on from Frank Reich, fine. You're still going to have the same roster. You're still going to have Bryce Young. And as we're seeing now, the limitations with Bryce Young because of his size. Could Bryce Young go on to be a very good QB? Of course he could. I don't think he's in the best situation. But it can't, like, we're seeing what CJ Stroud, and they're always going to have that comparison.
I was just going to say, but I mean, the comparison is slightly unfair one because CJ Stroud has Nico Collins, Tank Dell, like he's got Schultz, he's got weapons around him that Bryce Young just didn't have because they traded away his best one in order to do the deal to get him there in the first place. As you point out rightly, Brian, you wanted to jump in with a quick point there before we move on.
Yeah, I think ultimately it may not be actually Frank Reich that's the guy, the fall guy. It could be the GM, Scott Federer, because he ultimately is the one that did the deal essentially to get up to number 1, select the quarterback. Now, the selection of the quarterback is another, as you touched on there, it's another storyline in itself over which one they took. But he could be looking at that next year and ruin the fact that they've no number 1 pick. If it's all likely, it's in likelihood now they're going to end up being the number 1 team in the draft. But obviously that pick goes to the Bears, and they won't be in a position to right the wrongs and try potentially move on, because we've seen it in the past with the Cards. They quickly moved on after a year and took the next quarterback at number 1. It wouldn't surprise me if the Panthers were still there that they'd go and take Caleb Williams next year. But obviously that's not going to be the case. So maybe it'll be the GM that'll be the fall guy in the end, because he's quite been there for quite some time now. Maybe his tenure will come to an end.
Colin, away from the contention for the number 1 overall pick, at the loftier end of the league in the AFC North, the toughest division in football, trademark patent pending. Just when you thought things couldn't get any more dramatic, Steelers somehow managed to pull another win out of miraculous defensive play just when it seemed all was lost again. Ninth game in a row. We made this point last week. The 9th game in a row now where the Steelers have been outgained and still managed to win. The overall record for teams that have been outgained in that capacity, basically they're losing 5 games for every 1 they win. Steelers win 6 and lose 3. Ravens, of course, dropping a game, which has helped them out. The Browns then overturn that 17-3 deficit against the Ravens. They're very much back in the mix. Not that anybody was out of the mix, given that there was only a couple of games separating the entire division. Bengals dropped 1 to the Texans, but we've got 2 massive games now coming up this week, and I don't want to steal our thunder from our Thursday picks, but it's all the action happening there at the moment.
Yeah, just an incredible division, and because it defies so many different things. And the Steelers, as you pointed out, Magical Mike Tomlin and the way they're going about it, and the meme which people who are watching or listening to, I don't know if they've seen that, the picture of Tiger Woods and John Daly, and Tiger is dressed in his Sunday best, and Daly is in one of his more ridiculous garb, something like I'd wear just on an average Tuesday. And they're kind of pointing out the Steelers just seem to be having fun and finding a way to do it and ruining everybody else's Sundays. For the Ravens, to me, I really feel this was a case where they rightly were given their flowers over the last couple of weeks. They jumped into an early lead, and I think they thought the game was done. Plenty of people were pointing out Deshaun Watson's kind of terrible start to the game. I think the Ravens took their foot off the pedal, and that's a real issue, because it has been a recurring issue for them over the past, not just this season, Connor, but past couple of seasons, where they haven't been able to close. And that's a problem, especially when you get to January.
They've dropped a lot of 2-possession games as well, and it's actually striking that the Ravens have lost more in the last 2 years than the Raiders managed to do. That cost Josh McDaniels his job. Now, obviously, there's no sense that that's anything like that's going to happen in Baltimore, but there is something strange going on there when they play so hard and they can really, as we've seen, lay the wood on teams, and yet at the same time they can become complacent when they jump out to a lead, as they did again over the weekend. Just maybe, Brian, back to the Steelers before we move on to the other teams in that division.
Really.
But I just wonder, watching them week on week, and it's a meme, it's a joke, it's a recurring theme. You think either that it's completely unsustainable and they can't possibly go on doing this, and yet if they keep doing it week on week, part of me wonders, does the offense finally click into gear and then they become really dangerous?
We haven't seen enough signs to think that's going to happen. Kind of like this opening 2 drives, you wonder where Green Bay's defense was, because there was supposed to be this theory and narrative that the run defense has been resolved and it's fixed this season, but they essentially allowed the Steelers to go up and down the field on them for the first 2 drives for the 14 points. Thereafter, the Steelers couldn't do anything for the rest of the game. It was field goals for them, but ultimately their defense is what keeps them alive. I just don't think it's sustainable, because they're going to come up against teams that can really put up points, and that's when you really need your offense to step up and put yourselves in these games where it's a 34-31 type of game, a 28-27, whatever the narrative score is. But I just don't think it's there. I don't think it's going to be there this Sunday either. I think the Browns will. I'll give me a pick now. I think the Browns will turn them over convincingly on Sunday.
To those Browns, though, Brian, Colin rightly said Watson had a terrible start to the game. Towards the end, though, he started to show connection with Elijah Moore, starting to get into it, starting to see some signs of the old flashes, even on broken plays. You were kind of wincing at times, thinking, "Oh, that this season's Deshaun gets sacked there, or throws a bad pass," and yet he just showed flashes of what he can do, and it was just enough in the end to get them over the line.
Yeah, because bearing in mind they were down by such heavy scores at various different times of the game, 24-9, 21-17, and he goes 14 of 14 in the second half. Not one incomplete pass, but yet you didn't come away from the game saying, "Oh, that's the Deshaun Watson of ours. That's the Deshaun Watson that got the contract." He had a good game. He threw for 213 yards, but still didn't do anything for me off the charts. Like, "Oh my God, that was Deshaun Watson." But he had a much better second half. But ultimately, like, the Ravens' defense they turned over 178 yards in rushing, and the Browns never got away from the run game throughout the game. Even when they were down by the leads in the first half, they never got away. They kept going with Hunt and other players forward as well. Like, they just kept going, kept grinding it out. And is there a bit of complacency there? There was huge key plays in the game. The blocked field goal before halftime by the Browns on Justin Tucker, I thought that he only took 3 points off that in terms of taking the ball over. I think that was a bit of a momentum swing. Obviously, the interception late on kind of really turned it. But this thing of the Ravens not being able to close out games is a worrying concern. And yet this interesting stat I saw today in terms of the teams for the most games, over the course in terms of how long they were leading. 3 teams, like the 84 Dolphins were 10-0. They were only down for 14 minutes in those 10 games. The Broncos of 1998 were 10-0, and they were only down for 27 minutes. And the next team up, the Baltimore Ravens, 2023, only losing for 28 minutes of their 10 games so far this season. Broncos. The Ravens fans will believe the genuine that they should be 10-0 because they've lost to the Colts, they've lost this game, and they lost to the Steelers in a game where you really kind of hit the hammer on the head that night in terms of they really should have closed that game out. It's just finding ways to navigate games out where they don't get it over the line. But I don't think it's as bad as it was last year. Last year was even more concerning. They did it so many times last year.
But they easily could be at 9 wins and almost out of sight in that division, which is crazy when you think about it, given how tight it is and how close the teams are and the games between them have been. But that could have consequences down the line. You talk about the number 1 seed and how vital that could be in the murderer's row, which is the AFC. We've been saying it since day one. That's a very, very coveted prize to have. Getting your guaranteed bye for the first round, keeping that home field advantage ideally for the championship game could be decisive, as it pretty much has been for the Chiefs over the last couple of years. Colin, a lot of games decided by a field goal over the weekend, a lot of really exciting games, a lot of back and forth. It was nice to see as well, and if we can kind of push to one side, the Panthers, Bears, Jets, Raiders, and Colts, Patriots games. Defenses, at least in some of those games, were no longer on top. We got some real shootouts, some really entertaining games, including the one team we haven't talked about in the AFC, Bengals against the Texans, which, you know, the Texans seem to show up in instant classics every week, and this was yet another one of those.
Yeah, and I mean this was really, really impressive, I think, by the Texans, because the Bengals were missing a few, but you're always going to be missing players in the NFL. They went in there, and at no point did they look overawed. And even when Stroud made the mistake at the end, you still felt, you know, yeah, I mean, if he gets another chance, there's no reason he can't drive down the field. And I think that is, so impressive. And
But Colin, watching them, and you made this point earlier on the season, if you get the guy, if you finally have him, it lifts everything. Like suddenly every single guy, coaching staff, everything, they're getting an extra 10, 15% out of themselves. Texans can't run the ball. Suddenly they start running the ball. Oh, the O-line is down people, but they're protecting them. People are making plays left and right. You have, running backs kicking field goals, as we saw last week from Dario Gumbawale. Like, everybody's pulling behind this guy, because now it's gone from, oh, this is a nice little season and we're building on something, to, oh my God, we're going to make the playoffs here. We're actually in the playoff picture, and there's no reason to think that we can't go further.
Yeah, and he's taken away excuses from, and the Texans are taking away excuses from everybody, right? Because rookie head coach, rookie QB, not a roster that's absolutely stacked, a team that's been in the doldrums for years. You look at Devin Singletary, 150 yards? They just were they talk about complimentary football at the weekend. They were pounded when they needed to, but again, Stroud makes the right decisions all the time, whilst also having, I suppose, a bit of oomph or gumption or whatever you want to call it to really take the deep shots when he feels they're there. But his ability to process and to know when to step up, to know when to get rid of the ball, he is so polished, Connor. I mean, I think that's what's so impressive. Go back and Will Levis, okay? Will Levis had a great debut, but again, they were gimmick plays, right? And that he got away with. Now, Will Levis has come down to earth in the past couple of weeks because defenses have not allowed him. Will Levis can develop and get into something, but CJ Stroud's the real deal. You can't continue to do this week in, week out against different defenses with the weapons that he has. He is absolutely outstanding, and they were a real contender to make a push. Doesn't mean they'll get there, because there are holes in the roster, but I don't think anyone's going to want to face them.
Brian, Chargers Lions was another quality game over the weekend, and what I loved, and what I'm sure you love about this one, is Brandon Staley used to be Mr. Go for it in fourth down, and he got outdone by the king of the genre, the undisputed now, as far as I'm concerned, Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell just owned this one. The way they managed that final drive was just a thing of beauty. They're in field goal position. There's a minute and a half on the clock. And Dan Campbell, this is beautiful situational football, realizes, if I give the ball back to Justin Herbert, who's gone touchdown on his last five drives, we're going to lose this game. There's no way we can kick this field goal here. We have to go for it on fourth down, and we have to milk the clock, which is very, very difficult to do. The presence of mind to do that in that circumstance. They move the ball, they move the chains, they get the field goal, they win the game.
When you're 4 for 13 on third downs in any NFL game, you'd normally say, God, that's a really bad offensive performance. But it wasn't because of that, because he was 5 for 5 on fourth downs. Essentially, he knew this Chargers defense couldn't be stopped. The great head coach that was brought in to resolve this defense couldn't stop an explosive Lions rush. And he was brought in to resolve this issue with the run game. 203 yards of combined rushing between Montgomery and Gibbs. And Gibbs was on fire. They were looking.
I don't remember ever seeing Montgomery burst through like that and tightrope 75 yards down for a touchdown when he was playing for the Bears.
I thought, no, I know he's trying to get away, but I thought that one was a dubious one. I thought he stepped on the perimeter. I know when and it was looked at.
Wasn't enough to overturn, isn't that what got him
interesting.
off in the end? And it was
Yeah, I'm sure the
sliver of
Chargers
green.
fans
Maybe the HD on your TV isn't up to the quality of mine, but I thought there was a sliver of green.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. It's gas because already you get the Chargers fans, nitpicking different ones out throughout the course of the season. How was this one pulled back? How was that one pulled back? And how wasn't that one pulled back? I don't want to do a disservice to the Chargers because it was a great game, and again, I think it was very much a game of whoever had the ball last was going to win the game inevitably because neither team really defensively could stop the other team. But again, there was just early on in the game where Campbell's going for on fourth down, the kudos to say, we're here to win, and we're not going to mess around. We're going to go for it continuously and put them off kilter. Recognize we now need 4 plays defensively as opposed to just 3, and then obviously getting the ball back. But a huge win for the Lions. Kind of really does put them up there now. They're the number 2 seed right now, and with the Chicago to come, and then the Packers on Thanksgiving, they're very, very winnable games on the schedule for the Lions now. It's hard to see. They'll be in a real fight now to get that number 2 seed, I'd imagine. Even 1, depending on their games.
For all that, though, Colin, one thing that will really concern them is they got absolutely shredded by Keenan Allen, like a tremendous performance from him, and they just couldn't stop him.
No, but ultimately they got the win despite Keenan Allen having that performance. And I suppose the thing is, Connor, that Keenan Allen, I think, is the Chargers' best receiver. For me, he's far above Mike Williams. He is kind of a guy who can take the game by the scruff of the neck. And you hear that expression. If they had 22 of somebody, well, if you 22 Keenan Allens, you'd be going places. Averaging almost 16 yards a catch. You're going to face, I suppose, wide receivers in the playoffs, right? Which is where the Lions want to get to, who are going to be difficult to stop, right? When you come up against the likes of
AJ Brown, who they'll probably be facing.
AJ Brown, they're going to go off at times, and you've got to be able to live with that, and even if they're having a great game, put up scores yourself. So I just think sometimes when you are facing a quarterback as good as Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen is really on one, and you can still eke out a win, I'm not going to give him too much hardship for that, because I really think that Herbert is very talented, Keenan Allen is very talented, but the Lions dealt with it, and part of that was the aggression and the belief that they have.
Brian,
Connor, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we're talking about who they're going to come up against and have to deal with defensively. But looking at the schedule right now, it's hard to see whether they're really going to get that kind of real taskmaster game, before the playoffs. You know who they got this weekend. They got the Bears, then they got the Packers, they got the Saints. They play the Bears again. They got Denver. Okay, then they got the 2 games against the Vikings with Jefferson back. That will be the truly testing Cowboys thrown in there. So ultimately, I think where that division is going right now, if the Vikings continue on the trend and the upward trend that they're on, it's going to come down to those 2 games in December, and obviously the last weekend of the season, which could be a huge humdinger. That's probably a Sunday Night Football written all over it in terms of flexing.
The final game, when maybe I'm mischaracterizing it as a shootout, because it was probably anything but, to be fair, for the first 3 quarters. Commanders, Seahawks, teams were swapping field goals, and it was an absolute snorefest, and then just exploded into life over the final quarter. Commanders aren't going away easy, are they? And you got to have respect for them. They certainly quieted the 12s for a lot of that game, and the Seahawks did manage to pull it out in the end. Again, not a game where you're having a huge amount of confidence from Geno, but they just got enough done to pull it out.
Yeah, look, Seattle are just they're what's the right word? They're existing right now in the wildcard race. They're winning games. They're playing against the Rams this weekend, and they're only slight favorites. I never would have imagined that. Bear in mind, they could have tailed off of the Rams of late, but they're just not convincing, and they're just getting over the line. I thought Commanders really were probably more deserving winners in that game. But for all the flaws of hell, he still shows character. He showed it in the overtime game against the Eagles. He did it again with that drive at the end. And there was some dubious play calling, or flags in that game. The pass interference late on against the Commanders, I thought was unjust, and Rivera rightly looked very disappointed with the decision. They came out of the traps early. Took Seattle a long time to get back into it, and then obviously to be honest, with the killer was the touchdown, because the touchdown, Kenneth Walker came out of blue, obviously down the perimeter, and it was one that a lot of missed tackles, and he got into the end zone. But like, by and large, for large parts of the game, they kept him in check, and it was just one that got away, I felt, from the Commanders.
Yeah, and it's interesting watching Sam Howell as well. I mean, some of the stuff he does on broken plays, he had a couple of really nice just dump offs when he was under huge pressure to Brian Robinson, who then goes off on one occasion scoring a touchdown, on another occasion big gain, and stopped in Seahawks territory rather. But he does show you flashes, Colin. At times he's a guy that's easy to like, I suppose, and it's easy to see why so many neutrals kind of root for him when he's kind of the new Geno, really, in that he's somebody that people like to get behind because of the way he plays.
I suppose I've talked about it before. The Ron is coaching for his job, because very easy for a new ownership group to move on. But I think Geno deserves some credit for driving down the field ultimately at the end, and I think we're all being very down on the Seahawks. There are very few easy games in the NFL, and it was pointed out again, I suppose, over the last week. When you look at the viewing figures for the NFL, they're absolutely ridiculous. Like what was the Thursday night game last week, Connor, had almost 10 million viewers, right? For that Thursday night game on Amazon, which you have to go out of your way to access. And the Stanley
Chicago's
Cup,
a big market, Colin. People love their football, or what passes for it at Soldier Field.
The Stanley Cup finals got 9.1. I mean, the Thursday night game absolutely blows them out of the water. It is incredible. But the NFL, it's about parity. They realize that people want touchdowns, but possibly what they want more than even touchdowns are one-score games that come down, and we had so much of that this weekend. So there are going to be ebbs and flows and ups and downs. And I think ultimately Geno didn't turn the ball over, did what Pete asked, and got them in a position to win the game.
If only Ken Dorsey has thought of saying that to Josh Allen, don't turn the ball over, he'd probably still have a job. Right, we look maybe now at some of the teams, and we've touched on a couple of them that on the fringes of playoff contention, and some very unlikely ones in there. Colin, we spoke about the Texans in another context when we were talking about Stroud, but at 5-4 now, they're not only potentially in contention for a wild card place, they could still win the division. Jacksonville Jaguars obviously dropped a game to the 49ers over the weekend. Texans, they got momentum, they've got their guy, they're winning games against all comers. There's no reason they won't be feeling themselves after that Bengals game.
No, and just talked about parity in the league, and I mean they have the Cardinals, and the Cardinals have Kyler back, but they will look at their schedule, their remaining schedule, and they're at home the next two, the Cards, the Jags, and then they're at home to the Broncos. They're actually at home the next three, and then they're on the road against the Jets and the Titans. I don't know if that Jets game is the one that Aaron Rodgers has said that he's going to be back for from an alleged popped Achilles. But you got the Browns, the Titans, and the Colts to finish. So it's not murderer's row. People will drop games, right, between them and the Jags. There'll be a couple of games that they'll end up dropping. But I think given how they're playing, they should feel they have a chance. And I think, it would be a benefit to them if they make it, because they have, this is not a QB playing for a contract, right? This is a QB who is on a cost-controlled deal, and they are looking to add to the I suppose the roster. And I just think,
and you're way ahead of schedule here. I mean, nobody would have expected it this year. So the really interesting off season coming up for them, because now they're a team that people will want to play for.
Well, that's the piece. Like, if you can make the playoffs, right? When Peyton Manning ultimately decided to come to the Broncos, he did that like partly off the back of the Broncos had made the playoffs unbelievably in that Tim Tebow season. But making the playoffs it gives you a sales pitch to free agents to say, look at what we did last year. If you come in here, we can really take this thing to the next level.
And Nick Caserio, the general manager, obviously is an absolute genius who's been overlooked for many a year cruelly, and has turned out that he did have the vision after all that, and that CJ Stroud falling into his lap, I guess, are the two things that worked out for him there. You wanted to make a point on Aaron Rodgers, Brian?
Yeah, the last 3 games for the Jets are going up. Depends, in terms of what he will have to deal with if he just somehow miraculously come back from this injury. Miami on the road, which is right now has been a really strong defense of late. Then he's got Cleveland, which arguably are the best defense in the league. And then New England, who haven't had the greatest seasons, but their defense on their day can still play quite well. It would be a huge, huge task for him to come back from this injury, play December, and maybe even end up with another ACL or another, Achilles, and end up gone again, because that's, for me, that's just too much. And by then, the Jets could potentially be out of the playoff race as well. So why would you even consider risking the guy and damaging any opportunity you have of giving him a chance to be a Jets savior next season, potentially?
One defense he won't have to face, even if indeed he does manage to come back, Brian, is the Brian Flores unit in Minnesota, which has really helped them. That, and obviously Josh Dobbs coming in and hitting the ground running, to put it mildly. Justin Jefferson about to come back. The Vikings, we might have said with the Kirk Cousins Achilles, were done, but far from it.
Yeah, I think this is one we really got wrong. When we all went for the Saints, we all thought Joshua Dobbs would have a bit of a come back to earth scenario, but it wasn't to be. He was, his run game is so effective over the course of the season. When he was with Arizona, we saw it again in this game. But the players were getting so open against the Saints secondary. I mean, they had yards on every cornerback, every safety. They gave him every opportunity to complete as many passes as he wants throughout the game, and he did. And when you give him time and you get these players, in good space and position to make plays, it's only going to be going one way. And the Saints were again another disappointment. They're really very much a buyer's remorse right now, isn't it, with their Derek Carr situation, because they're coming out and saying all the right things to support him. Ultimately, you got Jameis Winston coming in. He throws 2 touchdowns. He also throws 2 interceptions. But again, he gave them more life than we saw from Derek Carr. That's a very concerning one. But not to get away from the Vikings and Flores, because
well, you've thrown Jameis into the mix. I know we're talking about teams that are spicy heading into the playoffs, but like, we couldn't leave the show without talking about Jameis. Like, nobody quite throws passes the way he does. Like, somebody said on Twitter over the weekend, or X, I can't remember who, so I can't give them their due credit. I've never seen a quarterback throw a pass that looks simultaneously like an interception and a touchdown so often. Like, those 2 contested catches in the corner of the end zone were absolutely glorious. Like, he does everything wrong, and somehow the receivers manage to come down with the ball twice.
It's unbelievable. Like, you watch it and your jaw is on the floor, both in awe and in abject horror. Your eyes are doing almost different things, and it's hilarious, right? Because we as fans obviously are watching it, but for coaches, I don't know if people heard Kyle Shanahan talking about the Brock Purdy touchdown at the weekend, and how mad he was. And he said, like, it's going to take me time to get over it, because Brock Purdy putting the ball in harm's way. So it'll probably be 2027 by the time Kyle gets over it, knowing his ability to hold a grudge. But with Jameis, yeah, you can't, like, he is the most entertaining one. And I won't forget, there was I cut it up. Was that last year or 2 years ago, Brian, where he went off the field, and Sean Payton was it 2 years ago, because Sean Payton was head coach of the Saints, and Sean Payton is literally at the podium and says, "No, Jameis, no, he'll be out for a while. He's on crutches." Jameis is in the locker room. The crutches are in the air and he's dancing simultaneously. It was truly an incredible moment.
I think that was a victory against the Bucs, because obviously there's a fierce rivalry against the Buccaneers, and they'd won that game, and obviously they got away from what they should have been doing, especially Winston. Yeah, that was a very funny one. Yeah, perfect.
But to round out in the Vikings, lads, getting Justin Jefferson back, you take anybody's QB1 and WR1 out of their team, and you usually looking ahead to next season. The Vikings have had both of those for a large chunk of this season, and they're still in the mix.
Yeah, and again, we made this point a few weeks ago. If they can keep things on the upward curve in terms of winning games, and they get Jefferson back and get the most productive player arguably in the league in terms of wide receiver position, there's no reason why he won't be in the mix. And that's why I think this division isn't a foregone conclusion, because they're going to get him back. They're going in the right direction. They're winning games. Like Kevin O'Connell, for me, is probably doing a better job this year than we did last year. And people would say, how is that the case? Because the way in which he's coached, and it kind of goes back to what the point Colin made in our preseason piece around, they may not win as many games, but yet they might have a better season. And that kind of, in a way, the way the season started for them with the close losses, you're losing your quarterback who looked like he was playing quite well. And now you're getting Jefferson back. But again, this Sunday night is going to be a big one now. It's gas. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't say it was a nothing game, but people were probably considering this one to be flexed. And now you've got the Vikings going into Denver. It's the makings of a great game, obviously.
Nice redemption arc for Brian Flores as well, Colin, who you've called out several times. I mean, you're looking at that defense, thinking of all the things he had to fix. Now he's quite likely maybe in the mix as a head coaching candidate at the end of the season, the way things are going, if they continue on that upward trajectory.
Like the Vikings are currently top 10 in EPA on defense and on offense, and Flores is a madman. Like if you look at the blitzing, but he, unlike Sean McDermott last night, he knows when to call it, and he's doing that because he doesn't have the right personnel. They don't have the personnel to do exactly what
they're playing with 6 or 7 defensive backs at times, as you say. They're sending the house, playing and play out because they can't get pressure up front, but they're figuring out ways around it, which is glorious to watch. That's what coaching is supposed to be about.
Exactly, and like again, kudos to Tomlin, right, for ensuring that Brian Flores had a way back into the league last year, but then to Kevin O'Connell for being willing to move on from the disaster that was Ed Donatel, and backing himself to say Brian Flores is obviously a big ego. He is, understandably, but I want him in the building. He's going to make us a better team, and he has.
Colin, we move to your Broncos. Came out of Buffalo with a win. There's one team every year that looks completely out of it and makes a glorious run. Last year, maybe it was the Lions, although they didn't ultimately get to the playoffs, but they certainly made it interesting from a very unpromising start. Can it be the Broncos this season?
Were you gonna jump in there, Brian? Go for it.
No. I'm looking forward to this part all night. I said the chair's going to come up now in a second, and the disco light's going to come on or something.
The crutches in the air, James style.
Last night was ways to kind of stay in it. I would love to know what the QB collective are thinking, but I do think that probably the next 3 games are going to be significant. Now the next 2 are at home, but it's the Vikings, the Browns, and then you're on the road to the Texans. I think that the Vikings will be an interesting one, right? Because the Bills since week 5 are dead last in EPA on defense, right? Whereas the Vikings are top 10. So it's going to be that's what will be fascinating to me. The Chiefs, that was a division game, right? So the Broncos now need to prove that when they're in a game where they're going to have expectations, and they went into Buffalo. Nobody's really giving them a prayer. Everyone's thinking it's going to be a get right game for the Bills, and you can go in with a chip on your shoulder. But you're at home to the Vikings now, who are the kind of the kind of entertainers of the league. But people are going to say, well, you should be winning the home games. You have to, in fairness, doff your cap to Vance Joseph, who has turned things around after 70 points against the Dolphins. They made changes on defense, and they've been much better. Now, they have, and I would still like the question to be asked: how did Russell Wilson have 15 pounds to lose? But he lost 15 pounds, and he's playing within structure.
He's playing with his structure, but he looks 15 pounds faster as well. Like when he's scrambling, he actually now looks like he's going to make it. He looks like he's going to keep the play alive, or he looks like he's going to be able to get for first down as he did several times. There's a lot of things trending in the right direction ultimately for the Broncos right now. Brian, the defense is stepping up and making plays. Russ is starting to use the weapons around him. Cortland Sutton had a great grab in the end zone. Send that clip to George Pickens. That's how you complete a catch in the end zone, rather than needing 5 yards and still not quite making it. And the running game looks good when it gets going.
Yeah, I mean, Williams, the running back, is fantastic. I mean, he gives. I know, like, there was some. He wasn't like putting huge numbers up last night at certain points, but he just gives them this other X factor. And it was a huge loss last year, and it's very evident that he comes back this season and how different. It takes a lot of pressure off Russell Wilson when he has a bona fide running back there, which essentially they didn't really have last year. But to the Wilson point, it's not so much about his management of the game, because Colin called it a few weeks ago. He's now become a game manager. It's not like Russ of old, where he's out there and he's throwing the big, as you called it earlier, the long balls and the dimes and stuff. It's about game efficiency. But when he gets out of the pocket and he's running, like towards the back end of his career in Seattle, his running numbers tailed off completely because he just wasn't in the position to do it anymore. And this season, it looks like 3 or 4 years ago, when he gets out of the pocket, he looks a real live threat, and he's picking up some lovely yards on the runs, which kind of, how many times are you relieved when you see your quarterback getting out and getting the first down and moving the chains? It makes a big difference. And Columns touched on, like, the defense has quickly turned around. I imagine if they make the playoffs, and bearing in mind all the grief and stick Column has given Vance Joseph throughout the course of the last 4 or 5 years, I can only imagine at the Crossroads in Whitehall there'll be a statue going up or something to that effect, similar to the ones around town. But no, all jokes. It's a great win, and it's great to see Broncos back challenging, because it makes it more exciting. And they're one game out of the wild cards. I know not everybody's played the same amount of games, but I mean, you never would have thought that 3 or 4 weeks ago, the way the season was going and the way in which they lost games against the Jets at home and others. So it's a huge turnaround, and it's great. But so ultimately, I think Colum's right. The test does come on Sunday, especially if Jefferson comes back for the Vikings.
One other team that's kind of hanging around, Colin, and we did touch on them earlier, so I guess we won't dwell on them for too long, is the Commanders. A team that looked, at least from an ownership perspective, to be in the middle of a teardown. The players aren't hearing any of that. Ron Rivera isn't hearing any of that, and they continue to be probably one of the toughest outs on a week-to-week basis. They'll put it up to anyone.
Yeah, but they're going to have to put it up to anyone, because sorry, Brian, after you just said nice things about my Broncos, the Commanders have the Giants coming up next, which is probably as kind a game as you could ask for in the NFL right now. But like after that, they're on the road against the Cowboys rather than at home. They welcome the
Thanksgiving as well, that game, Colin.
Which the Cowboys on Thanksgiving. You've got to play the 49ers, and your last game you welcome the Cowboys. Like, it's a really tough schedule. I think they could be a fly in the ointment for some of these teams, and particularly when it comes to seeding. Like the Dolphins are going to fancy having to go to Washington in the beginning of December, but I think it's probably too much of an ask. Can they do enough for Ron to save his job? I think that's probably, for me, that's the big question with his Washington team.
Well, we move into our next category, which is teams I think we can pretty much ride out of playoff contention. After the egg they laid in Frankfurt, Brian, that's definitely the Patriots, I think, in that category.
Yeah, I mean, the Patriots are essentially now in that kind of similar trade to where I suppose the Bears and the Giants and others are at that level in terms of looking far ahead. But I mean, the Mac Jones experience has died a death. It really has. Like, bearing in mind the first year he put the team in the playoffs, and I know they were well comprehensively beaten in Buffalo that night in the playoffs. But after their first year of a rookie to be in the playoffs, he thought there was better days ahead, and people were arguing the case that Bill Belichick had got it right, and they found the quarterback of the future, but it hasn't transpired. He's really regressed terribly. And like that game, for all the flaws in that game, they should have won it. They missed a field goal, which essentially was a chip shot, and they're in the red zone. And I've seen people put it up on Twitter, and it's hard to argue. That's probably one of the worst interceptions I can recall. Like, there was no strength, there was no understanding of the play. The tight end was turning around, he didn't even realize the ball had been intercepted. It was a really bad look for the Patriots. And it just makes things even more interesting because this Belichick story isn't going away, and it's talking about potentially being, moved on to another team, which makes it easier for the Patriots to move on. It's a bit like the Brady scenario. Nobody wants to admit they're moving on, but essentially they are moving on, and he'll move on to a different team. But they're on their bye, and then they play the Giants, and geez, that's a game in itself that you probably would switch off and watch maybe the Angelus or prayer at bedtime or something rather than watch that game. But it's a bad season, and like the Patriots are not used to this. Like I've seen fans looking at the drafts thinking it's unusual to see us in that top selection, but they'll have to get it right in this draft essentially because they will be going for a quarterback, I imagine. But tough times defensively, they're still decent enough, but they've nothing really in offense, and it's bad. It's very bad.
They'll be competing for a quarterback column with the Giants, Brian, and obviously we'll bring you back in on this, but they've never had such a bad 2-game stretch against any of their divisional opponents as they've had against the Cowboys this year. The points total just off the charts. Cowboys win, pulling up, to put it mildly. It's not fun to be losing, but it's even less fun when you're so far from being competitive in your own division.
Yeah, no, like the wheels have come off, and the concern for the Giants is that you've got to play the Eagles twice as well, and there's nothing for the Giants to play for. They're not making the playoffs. They know that the franchise, again, guys will want to play for their careers, and Dable probably needs to, because he really doesn't want the wheels to come completely off. But the franchise, the mood's going to be, we don't need, to get wins here. And you've got to, we know the NFC East, they don't like each other. So you've got to go on the road to the Commanders. You've got to go on the road to Philadelphia. It's very, very difficult because it feels like everything in the franchise is trending in the wrong direction. And the Giants have had huge issues last year against the Eagles. It's difficult to imagine, given the injuries that they have, that the Eagles won't just basically stick the ball up the jumper and kind of look to run all over the Giants again. The Saints are going to need to play, because they're still in contention for their division. The Packers, Matt LaFleur has to get victories. Belichick has to get victories. So there's nobody who you feel is going to be taking their foot off the pedal, perhaps, other than the Rams in that second last game on New Year's Eve. But this is all about 2024 for the Giants and who the quarterback ultimately is going to be.
It's a tough spot, to put it mildly, for Brian Dable, Brian, as Colm's kind of alluded to there in passing, in that the organization doesn't particularly want you to win games from this point because it's not in your interest from a draft capital point of view. But Brian Dable doesn't want to be going out with the whimper and putting a job that would have been unthinkable to imagine that it would have been under threat at the start of the season, given the way last year went. But it's not out of the question that you're clearing house completely at the end of the season.
I'd be very surprised if Dable is gone at the end of the season, even if they were to see out all the games now and lose. Like, it was always a mismatch against Dallas anyway. Like, bearing in mind, when the other first teamers in the opening game of the season, they were well taken care of. I wouldn't expect to be losing that level of rake week in, week out going forward against the teams in which they're going to come up about. I think ultimately it'll be competitive, but losses. And like Giants learn from the Judge era in terms of you can't expect any, piece of whatever practice squad quarterback to come in and essentially take over and be your quarterback. They got Tyrod Taylor in, which was a serviceable backup. And when he played, he was doing good things, and they won a couple of games with him, and they played well. And I say they probably should have beat the Bills. They didn't, but like, he was playing very well, for a backup. And then he goes, and they don't make any real effort to find a quarterback that can come in now and play in the absence of those two, essentially Jones and Taylor. They're going to run with an undrafted rookie, which looks like, because the first question Dable said yesterday is Tommy DeVito is playing next Sunday. So to me, it strikes me as the owners have said, we're writing this off and continue playing this guy, because as long as he plays, it sounds terrible, as long as he plays a quarterback, they're going to lose, because he's not NFL ready. He's not at the rate. He's not an NFL quarterback, with all due respect to the poor kid, and he's going to be exposed time and time again. I thought the more concerning thing on Sunday was the defense. They gave up 500 yards of total offense. And Colin called out last week the McKinney comments, and I didn't like it. I didn't think it was very fair that it was there was just narrative around things are going off. But I thought it went a different way when Mick Martindale and basically publicly came out at the press conference on Thursday and called him a liar, essentially. And then all of a sudden on Sunday, 3 players don't show up defensively to do their press conferences, which is Jihad Ward, Dexter Lawrence, and McKinney. And obviously Dexter's come out since and said it was my birthday. I wanted to see my family. So I suppose you could argue the toss on that one. But it's quite striking. The first game after your defensive coordinator comes out at a press conference, and to me that would have been more. Yeah, we know the situation. We're dealing with it internally, and that's the end of it. To be so public, that strikes me as players giving up on their defensive coordinator, and that was quite evident on Sunday. There was a lot of back chatter of Jim Martin Wink and Brian Dable on the sideline. I said at the column today, my real concern for Dable and for the Giants is Shane and Dable seem very tight. Very, very tight. You come over from Buffalo. It would be a huge task for Joe Shane to have to relieve the head coach of his duties, because I don't think Shane will be going anywhere. I think he's very much like the Ryan Powell scenario. I think he's justified in getting another year, but we'll see. We've been here before in November where we said head coaches won't get fired and they end up getting fired. So interesting to see what comes of it towards the back end of the season.
2 teams I was going to just round out on who are out of it, but might be interesting down the stretch because they do have things to play for. And as we saw, Colin, with the Cardinals at the weekend, Kyler is back and he's doing Kyler Murray things.
Yeah, and that's probably pleasing in some ways for the Cardinals. It's funny, I suppose, the expectation was that they might look to trade him. But given that they haven't traded him now at this point, and if he plays well, could it be that they ultimately decide to keep him in the building and use the picks as a building blocks? Or what if they end up with the number 1 overall pick and they decide to trade that? Like, so you have Kyler, he's NFL capable, he can take you to the playoffs. And then you get somebody who wants to move up to get a Caleb Williams or Drake May, is willing to give you 3 firsts and maybe 2 seconds. Like, the kind of capital that you have there. I think it'll be very interesting to see. I think what was pleasing if you're a Cardinals fan was how mobile Kyler looked, and the fact that they're certainly didn't seem to be any hangover or any
first game back from the ACL. He didn't look like he was protecting himself, which is great to see. Full of confidence.
No. Yeah, really, really, the turning and everything, he looked really good.
And Brian, finally, the Bears, an interesting one, and that Fields comes back from injury like Kyler. Obviously, nothing like his long-term dislocated thumb that's kept him out for a couple of weeks. But he's going to play hard for the last couple of weeks of the season because he's playing not only for his own job, he's probably playing for Matt Eberflus, his head coach's job too.
Absolutely, but more so for him. You called it last week. You got to get him back as soon as possible, because the longer he's out, the more of a quandary for the GM and I suppose the organization come the end of the season. What do you do with him? Because there's just not enough footage and not enough play to make a definitive decision whether he is the right man. And the last thing you want to do is, where the Bears are with potentially 2 top 10 picks, is to say, right, he is the man, and then a year down the road again and still no answers. And we've seen that with teams.
Because they got that Carolina pick, though, they're in an interesting situation in that, if Fields goes on a tear or they win, 3 or 4 of the games, and they do have winnable games potentially on the schedule as you look at it, at least you have certainty there. And their best chance of getting the number 1 overall pick lies in Carolina anyway. Yeah,
and that's why I think it's good that you're running on these 2 teams, because I just to refer back to Colin Murray. I mean, it's not against the realms of possibility that the Cards go on a bit of a run now. There's winnable games there for them, and they could essentially take them out of the sweepstakes at the top end of the draft. But they do have 2 number 1s, which maybe could help them as well. But the Bears have some games that are winnable as well. It's going to be a very interesting piece for the Bears. Obviously, they have the comfort of Carolina and all likelihood giving them the number 1 pick. I don't know what the right answer for the Bears is in terms of Justin Fields. What does he have to do for the remainder of the season? Bearing in mind that some of the teams are going to play, he's never going to be at the level. He's going to have to shock a number of teams for me with really dominant performances.
I think you've hit the nail on the head now. It's one thing to look at, game against the Packers is winnable. Obviously, they play the Cardinals. That's winnable, and he probably needs to win those. He's got to maybe take one of the 2 games against Detroit, or they've got to win the game against the Vikings, or they've got to do something special in one of the other games that says, oh, this is the guy that we can that we can roll with. Also, final point maybe before we wrap on the Bears. The Bears didn't win a divisional game the entirety of last season, and they've lost the 2 they've played so far this year. They got to get one of those divisional games under their belts. Ryan Poles said in his opening press conference as GM, "We're taking the North and we're not giving it back." They've given plenty of it back over the past year. That needs to change in a hurry if Fields is going to be the guy going forward.
Yeah, this game on the weekend as well, you're saying they have to knock off one of the bigger teams. And if they were to knock off the Lions, you could argue it's a divisional win. It's Justin Fields fresh after being off for a period of time. And people could raise their eyebrows at that one. But if they were to go into Detroit, and they've always played Detroit quite tough. We saw last year, even when Detroit were on their bit of a run. I remember the November
playing
game.
Detroit quite tough wasn't the hardest thing to do for many years.
No, but last year when they were on an upward
we've lost
turn,
a couple of terrible ones to them as well.
Yeah, but it was a game last year when the Lions looked like they were on an upward turn, and the Bears had a 2 touchdown lead going into the fourth quarter and managed to give that game away. There was many a game last season where Justin Fields had a lead in the fourth quarter, and that's when the game really, Colin always refers to it. There's quarterbacks and then there's fourth quarter quarterbacks, and that's essentially when you need to step up and win games. And Justin Fields, time and time again, is where he's deceived. He flourished to deceive in those instances. It'd be interesting if we see those games. Late on, he steps out. He has a minute and a half, 2 minutes to drive a team, win a game. That's also could be a kind of a turning point. It would be interesting to see if that materializes at any stage.
Very true. We've got a lot of interesting games to look forward to, particularly this weekend, and we will get to them in our previews on Thursday. But that's us for now on the Irish NFL Show. We'll be back with you very soon.